pesticides can work really well, but there are a lot of reasons that growers seek culturally or biologically based alternatives. For example, to reduce health risks to workers and owners, and also to deal with pests that have become resistant to a particular active ingredient. We know enough about resistance that it's really smart to think ahead and diversify your approach. Other reasons for choosing cultural or biologically based alternatives might include the concern about disrupting biologically based pest management systems that more growers are using. And of course, all growers need to meet residue requirements. Any residue of a non-exempt product would be problematic for a product that is marketed as certified organic, but even non-organic growers may need to deal with strict residue limits, especially when selling to customers in other countries. Finally, the desire to protect sensitive natural resources is a worthy consideration and in some instances required. So I'm going to talk a little bit more about these last two items in the next few slides. Most of you who signed up live and work in Oregon and Washington. In these states, as well as in California, application buffers are currently required along waterways that support threatened or endangered salmon or steelhead for 9 active ingredients. Some of these pesticides are used in berry or cherry production, and these restrictions along salmon-bearing waterways are not specified on the label, which is one reason why we're covering them here. So growers may not apply these pesticides within 60 feet of a salmon-supporting waterway if applying by ground, or within 300 feet of a salmon-supporting water if applying by air. Waterways include rivers, streams, estuaries, and other water bodies that support listed salmon or steelhead. So let's take a closer look at the list of chemicals covered by this restriction. This table shows the list of active ingredients subject to the salmon buffers and the common trade names for these ingredients and the common crops that these pesticides are used on. 5 of the covered active ingredients are insecticides, 3 are herbicides, and 1 is a soil fumigant used as a nematicide and fungicide. You can get more information about these requirements at these state and federal websites. So how do you know if your land is subject to these buffers? Well, the EPA has developed a tool called Salmon Mapper, which is quite a useful tool. The link is on the previous page, and if you click on that link, you'll get to this page. What you do is you select your state over here, and then select the pesticide that you're planning on using. You can see the list here, and then you click Submit. Salmon Mapper will return a map of the state with the counties subject to these restrictions shaded, as you can see here in Oregon. This doesn't mean that every inch of every county is subject to the buffers. You can use the zoom or type in a place name to get a view of the area that you're really interested in. For example, here is a zoomed in map of a portion of the Willamette Valley in Oregon, north of Salem. And I selected diazinon as active ingredient for the example here. The waterways subject to the buffers are mapped in red. You can zoom in or out as you like, and the limitation, as we discussed earlier, is described over here on the side, except here it's stated in yards rather than feet. And these restrictions are in place until the National Marine Fisheries Service completes consultation or the EPA adopts permanent measures to protect salmon from these active ingredients. The limitations vary a little bit from one chemical to another. Let's talk about maximum residue limits or tolerances next. As I mentioned earlier, it's important to be aware of the residue limits for the market that you are serving. They can vary quite a lot country to country and pesticide to pesticide. These links contain recently updated summaries of MRL limits for certain countries for cherries, blueberries, caneberries, and strawberries. These can be outdated in a hurry though, so you want to make sure that you're always up to date. The global MRL database is the place to find the up-to-date standards. On this slide, I'm showing a portion of a summary list for MRLs for insecticides allowable on blueberries, which was prepared in January by Joe DeFrancesco of Oregon State University. Note that this only contains summaries for certain countries, and it was prepared in January 2016. All MRLs are stated in parts per million. And the thing to pay attention here, here's the USA column, is that the boxes with gray shading show you the insecticides that have a limitation that's more strict than the USA tolerance, and where that applies and how much different. Well, it basically shows the US tolerance in parts per million and the tolerance, for instance, here in the EU. This is basically the same table for caneberries, and again, this was compiled by Joe at Oregon State University. This slide takes the same information but interprets it a bit more. I've applied red, yellow, and orange shading to provide a quick sense of the degree to which the restriction is stricter than in the US. So here the red shading shows where the MRL is 10% of the US standard, orange is 10 to 50% of the US standard, and yellow is 50 to 99% of the US standard. So you can see that playing out in these where we have a much stricter limit, a less stricter limit, or an intermediate. So that was half of them. So this is the second part of that. The main thing about this is that it's very important to plan in advance, and some things to consider would include designating specific fields for a particular market or export country, or adopting a more restrictive management regime, such as the techniques that Amy went over earlier, or rotational spray programs designed to fit multiple potential export countries. And of course, pesticides do degrade in the environment, but the amount of time for residue on fruit to diminish to the level of the MRL is subject to many factors, and that's beyond the scope of this presentation. So please consult your local extension service or your crop consultant for more specifics on that. If you enjoyed this webinar and support this kind of work, check out our website and consider supporting us for future such efforts.